Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney is heading to Washington next week, and Donald Trump's latest diplomatic gambit is already showing cracks. While Trump thinks he's holding all the cards with his tariff threats and annexation talk, the reality on the ground tells a very different story. This isn't just another routine diplomatic meeting. This is a high-stakes showdown that could reshape North American relations for decades to come.
All right, some breaking news this morning. We're just learning that Prime Minister Mark Carney is planning to head to Washington early next week to meet with U.S. President Donald Trump. This will be his second visit since becoming prime minister earlier this year. Of course, this is video we're looking at from the first visit Carney had to the Oval Office in the White House earlier this year. But again, we also understood from Mark Carney recently that he's in more constant communication with Donald Trump, certainly than his predecessor, Justin Trudeau, was. But of course, this all comes as we're talking U.S. tariffs, trade, and everything else with the review of CUSMA. So this is going to be a very important head-to-head meeting. Trump-Carney next week in Washington. We'll have more details as we flush this story out here.
The timing of this visit couldn't be more significant. Carney will meet Trump in the Oval Office on Tuesday, marking his second visit to the White House since becoming prime minister earlier this year. This meeting comes ahead of a critical review of the USMCA trade agreement. That's the United States-Mexico-Canada trade pact that's up for review in 2026. But there's another factor at play here that makes this meeting particularly explosive: Trump's Golden Dome missile defense program. Here's where things get interesting. Trump has been pushing Canada to join his ambitious Golden Dome project, a space-based missile defense system that he claims will cost $175 billion to build. But Trump's offer comes with strings attached, and those strings reveal just how desperate his position really is. In fact, Trump recently made his position crystal clear when he suggested, and I quote, "Why don't you just join our country? You become the 51st state," as Trump put it during a recent discussion about missile defense.
And Canada called me a couple of weeks ago. They want to be part of it. To which I said, well, why don't you just join our country? You become 51, become the 51st state.
Let's now bring in Peter MacKay, former Conservative Foreign Affairs Minister, in this conversation. Sir, good morning and thank you for your time.
Good morning, actually. Good to be with you.
Let's make a start with your reaction to this news that's just come in. Prime Minister Carney visiting Donald Trump for the second time in few months.
Well, I think it's always positive to engage. Difficult to...
Let's rewind to understand how we got here. Earlier this year, Carney won Canada's election with a message that was essentially a rejection of Trump's bullying tactics. His victory was fueled by Trump's annexation threats and his aggressive trade war against Canada. But instead of backing down, Carney has been playing a much smarter game than Trump realizes. Though opposition leaders like Pierre Poilievre have been criticizing Carney, noting that American tariffs have actually doubled under his watch while failing to deliver on his promise of a trade deal.
Carney had promised that he would have a deal by July 21st, and here we are in October. There's no deal, and the American tariffs have doubled on Canadian industry under Carney's watch.
The stakes of this upcoming meeting are extraordinary. Political analysts are expressing serious concerns about whether the Prime Minister can return with concrete results. The economic disruption in U.S.-Canada relations has reached a critical point, with worries mounting about whether Trump will continue to suggest Canada should become part of the United States instead of negotiating the USMCA trade deal in good faith.
Well, I mean, I think we can see clearly on an economic level, this relationship between the U.S. and Canada has been extremely disrupted for months now. But yet, you know, as many have pointed out, we still have most of our trade coming under the CUSMA deal, and so therefore not affected. And I think one thing we really have to be worried about is whether that's going to last, or whether the upcoming review of CUSMA could find that actually the president isn't interested in carrying this on, you know, in any real good faith. That's why his 51st state comments really stress me out, because I think everybody's been hoping perhaps he'd stop saying that once Prime Minister Trudeau was, maybe that was a Prime Minister Trudeau thing, and he doesn't say that with Prime Minister Carney, but no, apparently he does. And so it worries me that if he's saying that about the missile dome, will he also say, hey, look, you know, we don't have to do this CUSMA thing. You guys could be the 51st state, and then we can just trade for, you know, be no problem. We won't have these kinds of issues. And so wondering where his head is. And also just looking at what's going on in the U.S., I mean, the situation with James Comey, like, this is not a president that we have any reason to think is reasonable to deal with or respectful of institutions.
The Golden Dome program itself is Trump's attempt to recreate Israel's Iron Dome system, but on a massive scale to protect the entire United States. The system would use a network of satellites, sensors, and space-based interceptors to detect and destroy incoming missiles. It sounds impressive on paper, but the reality is far more complicated. Trump has been desperately trying to get Canada to pay for part of this system. In May, he demanded that Canada pay $61 billion to join the Golden Dome program, but only if they remain a separate but unequal nation, as Trump put it. If Canada agreed to become the 51st state, Trump said, they could join for free. This isn't diplomacy, it's extortion. But here's what Trump doesn't seem to understand. Canada holds more cards than he realizes. The trading relationship between these two nations is the world's largest and most complex, and it's almost evenly balanced. In fact, it actually favors the US because they receive Canadian raw materials which they turn into jobs. The absurdity of some US tariffs, including declaring kitchen cabinets and furniture as national security threats, only underscores the strong defense and security partnership between the two nations.
In fact, it's heavily in the U.S. favor because they receive our raw materials, which they turn into jobs. So they're well advantaged from this. Not only that, but we have a large defense security relationship with America. There's no other country in NORAD except Canada. There's no other place in the world where the United States would have less of a military presence than the U.S.-Canada border. So we've always had their back, and we will continue to be part of any security and security pact that is created. So I think we need to remind them of all of those important features of the relationship, which accrue to the very strong benefit of the United States of America.
More than 75% of Canada's exports go to the United States, yes, but Canada is also the top export destination for 36 U.S. states. Nearly $3.6 billion worth of goods and services cross the border each day. About 60% of U.S. crude oil imports come from Canada, and 85% of U.S. electricity imports are from Canada. Canada is also the largest foreign supplier of steel, aluminum, and uranium to the U.S., and has 34 critical minerals and metals that the Pentagon desperately needs for national security. In other words, Trump needs Canada far more than he's willing to admit. Carney understands this dynamic perfectly. Instead of getting drawn into Trump's annexation theatrics, he's been methodically building Canada's position. He's pursued closer relations with other Western countries, courting the UK and France in his first visits abroad as Prime Minister. He's collaborated with Australia on new radar systems for the Arctic. He's been building alternatives while Trump has been making threats. The economic impact has been severe, with 100,000 jobs lost in just 2 months. Despite global diversification efforts, Canada's economic relationship with the U.S. remains paramount. The mounting political pressure on Prime Minister Carney to deliver the good deal he promised during the election campaign is intense, with upcoming meetings between premiers and Great Lakes governors adding to the urgency for concrete progress on these critical trade issues.
Last 2 months. That's how important it is. And you can go and with a diversification strategy and travel the world and sign all the landmark agreements that you want. If they don't actually deliver anything in terms of jobs, it all goes back to the United States. And how can we sign a deal to try to mitigate some of the damage that has already been done? So that's why it's so important. And so what we're hearing is that, you may target some sector and pick some winners, which means that eventually we will have also some losers, and that's where the concerns will grow in some sectors who are wondering what was going to happen to us.
Yeah, because there will be some that may not get that cutout, Melanie. So with any kind of relief, if there is someone steel and aluminum tariffs, will that buy him any kind of relief from opposition parties in the House of Commons?
Not until there's a good deal. That's what he promised Canadians in the election, and it's been months that we've been waiting to see actual, action, to see real progress towards that deal. There's just been a lot of talk. So the pressure keeps mounting every time there's a meeting like this. The pressure rises on Prime Minister Carney. I think that on Sunday, the premiers and the governors of the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence Seaway are having their own summit, and they're going to have a press conference, I think, on Monday, presumably they're going to be calling for an increase in trade around that region, around the Great Lakes. They want to see trade diversification in trade, like more trade together, as opposed to this cooling that we've been seeing. So I'm sure that we're going to hear them calling for that, and that's only going to increase the pressure on Tuesday's meeting.
The trade situation tells an even more revealing story. Trump's tariff regime has hit the Canadian economy hard, with unemployment reaching troubling levels. But Canada has been adapting. The country recently dropped many of its retaliatory tariffs to match U.S. tariff exemptions for goods covered under the USMCA. This isn't capitulation, it's strategic positioning. Carney is removing Trump's justifications for further escalation while positioning Canada as the reasonable party in these negotiations. He's making it clear that Canada wants to work within the existing framework, not blow it up. The Golden Dome issue perfectly illustrates Trump's fundamental misunderstanding of the situation. He thinks he can use the missile defense program as leverage to force Canada into submission. But the program itself reveals American vulnerability, not strength. Cost estimates for the Golden Dome range from Trump's claimed $175 billion to the Congressional Budget Office's estimate of $831 billion over 20 years. And that's just to protect the United States. The American Enterprise Institute puts the cost at a staggering $3.6 trillion. These aren't small numbers, and Trump desperately needs other countries to help foot the bill. But there's a deeper problem with Trump's approach. The Golden Dome faces serious technical challenges. Critics argue that the system would be less efficient than traditional regional missile defenses because the space-based interceptors would be constantly moving in orbit, meaning only a small fraction would be in the right position to intercept any given threat at any given time. Moreover, the program has raised serious concerns about the militarization of space. China, North Korea, and Russia have all criticized the plan, with China's foreign ministry saying it heightens the risk of space becoming a battlefield and fuels an arms race. Russia has warned that the system could lead to Previn 5, but essentially first strikes, turning space into a weaponized environment. The program is also plagued by conflicts of interest and oversight issues. 42 members of Congress have requested the Pentagon's Inspector General to review Elon Musk's involvement in Golden Dome, citing concerns over deviations from standard acquisition processes and a subscription model that could give Musk undue influence over national security. All of this context makes Carney's position much stronger than Trump realizes. Canada already participates in continental defense through NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command. Canada committed $28 billion over 2 decades for NORAD's modernization back in 2022. So when Trump talks about the Golden Dome, he's really talking about expanding an existing partnership, not creating something entirely new. But Carney has been clear about Canada's red lines. During their last meeting in May, he privately asked Trump to stop calling Canada the 51st state. When Trump brought up annexation in the Oval Office, pronouncing a union between Canada and the U.S. as meant to be, Carney responded diplomatically but firmly, "As you know from real estate, there are some places that are never for sale." Trump's response, "Never say never," revealed his fundamental misreading of the situation. He thinks this is a negotiation where everything is for sale. Carney knows it's about defending Canadian sovereignty while maintaining a productive relationship with an essential partner. The political risks for this upcoming meeting are significant. As political science experts point out, a key political risk is that President Trump raises the 51st state issue again and seeks to publicly embarrass Prime Minister Carney during his visit. Another risk is that no apparent progress on trade is made, which would be bad news for the Prime Minister domestically, as the Conservatives accuse them of failing to successfully address the ongoing trade war with the United States. But these risks also create opportunities for Carney. If Trump does try to publicly embarrass him with annexation talk, it will only reinforce Carney's message to Canadian voters that he's the leader standing up to American bullying. If Trump is reasonable and productive, Carney can claim credit for managing a difficult relationship. Carney will be accompanied by his minister responsible for Canada-US trade, as well as his foreign minister and industry minister. This isn't just a bilateral chat between leaders, it's a serious diplomatic mission with Canada's top trade and security officials. The Canadian embassy has been buzzing with activity, and sources suggest the Prime Minister's personal involvement signals expectations for concrete results rather than just talks. The broader context here is that Trump's approach to international relations continues to be transactional and zero-sum. He sees every relationship as a deal where someone wins and someone loses. But modern international relations, especially between neighbors and allies, are about creating mutual benefit and shared security. Canada and the U.S. face common threats, from cyber attacks to climate change to potential missile threats from hostile nations. These challenges require cooperation, not coercion. They require building trust, not making threats. They require thinking strategically about long-term interests, not just short-term political theater. Carney seems to understand this. His approach has been to engage seriously with American concerns while maintaining Canadian positions. He's been willing to discuss missile defense cooperation because it serves Canadian interests too. But he's not willing to be bullied into bad deals or to compromise Canadian sovereignty for the sake of avoiding Trump's tantrums. The Golden Dome issue also reveals something important about American strategic thinking under Trump. The program is being sold as essential for homeland defense, but it's also clearly designed to project American power globally. Trump has said that space-based weapons would obviously be used for offensive purposes as well as defensive ones. This creates a dilemma for Canada and other allies. They're being asked to help pay for a system that could be used to advance American interests around the world, not just defend North America. That's a very different proposition from the mutual defense arrangements that have traditionally defined the U.S.-Canada relationship. The question is whether Trump is prepared to engage substantively in return. His track record suggests he's more interested in creating dramatic moments than solving complex problems. But the stakes are high enough that even Trump might recognize the need for a more serious approach. The reality is that both countries need this relationship to work. Canada needs access to American markets and security cooperation. America needs Canadian resources and cooperation on continental defense. The challenge is finding a way forward that serves both countries' interests without either side feeling like they're being taken advantage of. Trump's mistake has been thinking he can use American economic leverage to force Canada into submission on every issue. But leverage works both ways, and Canada has more cards to play than Trump realizes. The key for Carney is to play those cards skillfully without escalating the conflict unnecessarily. As we watch this meeting unfold, we're really watching a test of two different approaches to international relations. Trump's approach is based on dominance and deals, the idea that America can use its power to force other countries to accept American terms. Carney's approach is based on partnership and mutual benefit, the idea that both countries are stronger when they work together as equals. The outcome of this meeting will send signals far beyond North America. Other American allies are watching to see whether Trump's bullying tactics work, or whether principled resistance can lead to better outcomes. The stakes couldn't be higher, and Carney knows it. What makes this particularly interesting is that Trump may have overplayed his hand. His annexation talk and his demands for payment for the Golden Dome have actually strengthened Carney's political position at home. Canadians don't want to be the 51st state, and they don't want to be bullied by their southern neighbor. By standing up to Trump, Carney is doing exactly what his voters elected him to do. The irony is that Trump's aggressive approach may actually make it harder for him to get what he wants. If he had approached Canada as a partner rather than a subordinate, he might have found more willing cooperation on missile defense and other issues. Instead, his threats have forced Canada to look for alternatives and to strengthen its position for what could be a long-term confrontation. As Carney heads to Washington, he's not going as a supplicant seeking American favor. He's going as the leader of a sovereign nation with its own interests and its own leverage. That's not the dynamic Trump was expecting, but it's the reality he'll have to deal with. The meeting next week won't resolve all the issues between the two countries, but it will set the tone for the relationship going forward. If Trump continues with his bullying tactics, he'll likely find that they backfire. If he's willing to engage seriously with Canadian concerns, there might be room for progress. Either way, Carney has positioned Canada to weather whatever comes next. He's built relationships with other allies, strengthened Canada's economic position, and maintained public support for his approach. That's not the position of a leader who's been outmaneuvered by Trump's tactics. The real test will be whether Trump can adapt his approach to deal with a Canadian leader who won't be intimidated. Based on his track record, that seems unlikely. But stranger things have happened in politics, and the stakes are high enough that even Trump might surprise us. What we're really watching is a masterclass in how to deal with a bully. Carney isn't backing down, but he's not escalating unnecessarily either. He's being firm about Canadian interests while remaining open to cooperation where it makes sense. He's building strength while maintaining dialogue. That's exactly the approach that's most likely to succeed in the long run. Trump's tactics might work in the short term, but they create resentment and resistance that ultimately make cooperation more difficult. Carney's approach might take longer to show results, but it builds the kind of trust and mutual respect that make lasting agreements possible. As we watch this drama unfold, remember that this isn't just about trade deals or missile defense systems. It's about what kind of relationship two neighboring democracies can have in an increasingly complex world. The outcome will matter not just for Americans and Canadians, but for the broader question of how democratic allies can work together in the face of global challenges. Carney's trip to Washington next week isn't just a diplomatic meeting, it's a test of whether principled leadership can prevail over bullying tactics. The early signs suggest that Trump's approach is already backfiring and Carney is playing the long game exactly right.